everybody, it's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we continue our discussion on happiness. And to get things going, Shag sent over a link to an infographic about happiness. And so I'll share that, I'll share that link with everybody. But go ahead, Shags, tell us a little bit about how you stumbled across this and what grabs your attention about it.
I stumbled across it because I'm a subscriber to a website called happify.com. Happify.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Happify.
happify.com.
Yeah.
They send these graphics, so they've got different programs, which are good. It's mental health and wellness support that I think came through one of my Medicare supplemental programs.
Yeah.
In any event, because I'm a mentor on wisdo.com, helping people with money issues that impact their mental health and wellness, I kept it. And then today I was looking for something. I was looking for the link for this, and I typed in happiness, and this popped up. I said, "Oh,
yeah, this is great." So happiness is a combination of how satisfied you are with your life and how good you feel on a day-to-day basis. Okay. 40% of your happiness is controlled by your thoughts, actions, and behavior. 10% is determined by your circumstances, and 50% is genetically determined.
I thought that was interesting.
Very interesting. So, Brian, that would seem to support the belief that each of us have our own kind of base bowl of neurochemical soup.
Yes, that's sort of programmed, or at least I would say operationalized.
All right.
Because when I looked up the neuroscience of happiness, and it always talks about happiness and pleasure together for some reason, but that was the specific title of the research. It said the neuroscience of happiness and pleasure. It says that we're not designed for happiness. It's by and large a construct. Because there's no biological basis for it. The biological basis is survival.
Right, for any critter, yeah.
Right.
Survive and multiply.
Exactly.
Right. So basically, we just infest the planet, I guess, is really what our job is. So, yeah, we're just another organism that's interfering with Earth. And so
we're all just digestive canals
there
that
it is.
surrounded by a different set of cells.
We're fertilizer factories. That's
every creature is.
Every creature is. So
and it's just better to be at the top of the food chain.
There it is. But the plant kingdom is ultimately who really benefits from our presence here.
Yeah, so you wonder, are they cultivating us?
Or
are we cultivating plants?
It certainly makes you wonder, doesn't it? So otherwise, you think the plant kingdom could have killed us all off by now. There's plenty of toxins in the plant kingdom.
So, yeah, speaking of non-detectable neurotoxins,
exactly.
Send over to Russia.
Yeah.
I think I know somebody who created one.
Yeah. That's what we really need, a good neurotoxin. Okay, anyway, but it says so 50% we have to deal with whatever our genetic foundation happens to be. And for some, that's obviously going to give them an easier row to hoe. And for others, it's going to make it that much more difficult. But then we get into this part about 40% of the happiness is controlled by thoughts, actions, and behaviors. That's obviously the part down here where they say happiness is a skill. So that has to really come from how you manage your thoughts, how you manage your actions, how you manage your behaviors. Always wondered what the difference is between an action and a behavior, but okay. But because I really can't manage this over here. Let's see. Yeah. So, and Brian, feel free to chime in if you've got, sorry, there's very little we can do at the genetic level. Am I correct?
Yeah, that changes or has capacity to change over time, but it's not much you can do to, you become a subject of more.
Right. So if we're taking any sorts of supplements, medications, whatever, that's still not changing our genetic determination.
No.
If anything, yeah, it's still working on the 40% of the happiness controlled by your thoughts. Yeah, so that's very interesting. And then 10% is circumstances, because stuff happens. And how we decide to respond to that stuff is ultimately what's going to change the frame we put around it. So let's see what Happify says. What happiness is not. Happiness is not feeling hunky-dory all the time. Happiness is not having all the money you could ever want. Happiness is not refusing to see the negative stuff in the world. Thank you for that one. And happiness is not a final destination. I
Mm,
give you no arguments about any of these.
exactly. I like that.
On the philosophical side, I'm going to show you something else that's going to take happiness as a destination and put it into a little bit of a question, but that's the fun part about what we do here, isn't it? Happy people are healthier. They have lower rates of cardiovascular disease. They have better immunity. They heal faster. They're more likely to have a healthier diet.
Mm-hmm.
And
Those are all true.
they live longer. Yeah, but does happiness make you eat more healthily, or does a healthy diet support you being more? So which of these is a cause and which is an effect? Like when I think about lower rates of cardiovascular disease, I would say that's probably an effect than one receives. That and having better immunity, that's an effect. Healing faster, that's an effect. Living longer is an effect. More likely to have a healthier diet is either coincidental or it's part of the causative side of things.
I
I
think it's
mean,
more of the causative side of things. Like they've been studying this in terms of centenarians who live long
sure.
and their relationships that they have. And what they discovered is they tend to be happy when they are around family members or they, feel like they're not forgotten.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that impacts their capacity to digest food well, as opposed to the other
Ah,
side of the coin was loneliness. And that's a public health concern right
yeah,
now.
big time, big time. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, particularly in communities like the one I live in, absolutely. Isolation and loneliness, a
Hmm.
very big deal. Shags just chatted over to everybody the difference between action and behavior. I love this definition. It certainly clears it up. Behavior is a countless individual performance respective to communal expectations. So we would call that a non-count noun. Yeah, so it's just something that's more generalized or whatever. Whereas an action is something that is performed to fulfill an agenda or an aim or an objective. So actions are more deliberate and behavior is more, I guess, foundational or more habituated.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's habitual. It's the operation, and you operationalize those becomes the habit, if you will.
Right. So I would wonder then if my way to ultimately change the behavior, they're saying again that happiness is a skill. So if I want to be happier, I've got to focus more on my actions because a long pattern of certain actions will ultimately impact my behavior.
Right.
Right.
And break the word up, be have, right? So I
Um,
always talk about being is really the first call to action, not the doing, but can you be it? Then follow that up with the action
mm,
itself, the doing. Now you have this loop. Because when they
mhm,
study behaviors or habits in particular, they always study the three components. You have something that triggers it, then you have a cue, then you have an action that leads
mhm.
to a reward, and you continue that cycle.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
All
it
right.
becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And now it's like automated at that point.
Mhm. Very interesting. Very interesting. Okay, it is happier to have steady levels of moderate happiness over a period of time than spikes of extreme happiness. And that kind of aligns very nicely with what we were saying is the difference between happiness as a response to a given situation versus happiness as a state of being.
Right.
So that's very interesting. Okay, why your happiness isn't just about you. Well, of course it's about me. Anyway, happy people are more productive at their jobs. Okay, I get it. So they're saying there's benefit to others. They typically have deep relationships with others. Uh, they help others and volunteer more. They're more likely to donate money to charities. They're more creative problem solvers. All right, that's all good. That's all good. I like it. Increase your happiness in the long run by nurturing relationships, having new experiences, helping others, being grateful for what you have. So again, I look at these and I go, well, if we want to see how this aligns with happiness as a response versus happiness as a state of being, nurturing relationships, that feels like what you were saying before, is that it's an action that starts off as an action. We're going to do some things intentionally, deliberately, to build stronger relationships and create better relationships, etc. And over the course of time, that should become more foundational in our behavior. So I would say that right now it probably starts off as something that's situational happiness, but can grow into something that contributes to happiness as a state of being.
Right. That's where we can, that's why I said before, at least in my mind, that we only experience happiness incrementally. Like
Mhm.
we can only be conscious of so much in any given point in time. So we start out in a relationship and say, yeah, I think this relationship is going to make me happy. And then something happens and it
Mhm.
challenges that. So now we have to keep moving the construct forward. So we have
Right, right.
to wait. And I guess that's why this comment about happiness as a skill keeps coming up, because it
Yeah,
does take a little bit of cultivation for you to sustain, some kind of level of happiness, I guess.
right. But even then, I would wonder, do people think that they're doing these or are practicing these skills? Let's go back to the words they used. Happiness is a skill you can build with consistent practice. So when you're practicing these happiness related skills, do you think people are doing them because they want to increase their happiness factor? Or is that just like a secondary, benefit of focusing on having good, strong relationships with people? Because if the only reason why I'm cultivating a relationship is because it supports me in being happy, then I would imagine the other person might feel a little bit used. So,
Exactly.
you know,
Exactly.
so so that's interesting to kind of go, well, what is the primary action and what is the primary benefit? And then what are the secondary benefits that might come along with that action?
Right. And I think that's why happiness in the center of the change grid, if you approach things from that perspective, then
Mhm.
even as you start to move away from it outside of the green circle, you can at least get grounded again and say, okay, yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So happiness
Mhm.
should be a check and balance,
Yeah, yeah,
not
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
simply just the destination point.
Interesting, very interesting. And Chris and Tim and Shags, we'd love to hear you guys weigh in. So do feel free to unmute any old time and share with us whatever you'd like to share. So having new experiences, I think just by those words alone, that tends to be more situational. But I imagine if you can fill your life with um, new experiences that are happening frequently enough, they could ultimately support your state of being of
Hmm.
happiness. Helping others, again, this is an action that we're taking. So we feel happy in the moment that we did that. We talked about that before on the amiable in-grid side of the change grid. But if you do that and it becomes part of the way that your heart and spirit operate, then I can see how that also becomes part of your state of being. And being grateful for what you have, I imagine that would take the form of some sort of meditation or journaling or some sort of acknowledgement, whether that's prayer or however you put it, however you frame it, that kind of conversation or dialogue with oneself and greater powers. So being
Hey T.
grateful. Which hey, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel kind of weird about what I'm about to say because I've never thought about a dark side of happiness before.
Do
So
tell.
I was thinking about what's the cost, right? So at a particular person's happiness, this happiness environment, um, how engaged are they really? Like, let's say if your happiness means you have a conflict free environment, so you're not willing to engage to a
Mm-hmm.
certain level. So it's costing everyone else your happiness, your ability to stay in your little
Mm-hmm.
happiness bubble could be costing the others around you because of the barriers you put in place to preserve your happiness. And I've never thought about a dark side, but I'm hearing this. I'm like, wow, I wonder
Yeah.
what's the cost at times.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because I do think that happiness taken to a certain extreme can be used as a defense mechanism, as a way of insulating oneself from the realities of life. They could also just be deluding themselves. So, but one way or another, it could be kind of an escapist thing, but because they're happy, it feels like it's a positive thing. And, but as you've just pointed out, there can be real problems with it, real problems with it.
That's why by and large, it's really from a psychological perspective, psychologists tell me happiness is a construct.
Yeah, you build it up, you make it up.
Right, because everyone's going to have different variations and versions of that. And then they also, to Chris' point, they'll say, well, this makes me happy. And then they get engaged in it and it doesn't.
Yeah, yep. And plenty of things make us happy the first time we do it, or the first few times we do it. That whole law of diminishing returns, I think, applies to, again, this is situational, but situations that make you happy don't necessarily make you as happy as you do it more and more frequently. So, things have got to change. Yeah.
Or even the perception of happiness, because I know many of us probably experience having a goal, but then once you get to that goal, it's like, wow, it's not all that we thought it was.
Right.
So it's that perception of happiness, and it's like, well, this isn't happiness because it's still unfulfilled.
Right. Yeah, very interesting to kind of look at that, because ultimately we need to make this whole discussion about happiness something that applies practically to the kind of work that all of us do. And we have to understand that while there are a lot of unhappy people who we could help become a little bit happier in their own life, and plenty of people who are pretty happy that like to take it up to the level of joy or something, that we can do that. But what about the people who are doing their very best to tell the world that they are absolutely happy and just the way they are? They don't have any problems. I mean, even when you're one of our colleagues in the world of change works deals with populations of addicts of various substances and behaviors and all that. And a lot of them have convinced themselves that whatever their drug of choice is, or drink of choice may be, or action of choice may be, they say it makes them happy. And you go like, well, then we need to explore your definition of happy, because this stuff's killing you.
So T, I'm thinking about when we're managing teams, right? And so you've got someone whose skill set that you feel could be useful in another area, or you feel they should be promoted, and they're saying, no, I don't want to do that. I'm happy doing what I'm doing. I'm happy with this job. And so that can get a bit conflicted because I think maybe even to Chris's point about the dark side, that person being content in the role that they are performing, and yet leadership or someone sees that they could be more useful in a different space. And that can create problems for everyone involved in that scenario, because the incumbent can begin to feel pressured to begin to do something that they really don't want to do. And sometimes I think we look down on folks who are comfortable and happy in the role that they're in.
Right. And to expand on that, how many people are happy enough in the job that they do because they're really getting their joy in other areas of life?
Right.
And then their business leaders come along and say, well, no, your greatest fulfillment should be here at the company or whatever. And you're kind of going, no. I mean, work is a job is a means to an end.
Yeah.
And so.
Hey,
So
T.
if we were to take that, what Chris and Tim just described, and say, okay, well, what does a PowerPoint look like to move people back who've gone too far beyond their means out of that green circle? Because I'm thinking, I just seen an article just yesterday that Harvard did, where it said you know, if burnout is not an employee issue, it's an employer issue. So there's a lot of unhappy people right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
And again, you know, what's the difference between happy and motivated? You know, at a certain point, they tend to bump into one another, if not end up being synonyms of one another.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Hey, T, I got a
Yeah,
good,
go ahead. Yep.
I got a good picture, and this comes from conversations I had with Tim about the Great Resignation. When you
Mhm.
think about return to office as a picture of what Tim was just saying, somebody say, hey, I'm perfectly happy doing this job here, right?
Right.
But now you're telling me, to your point, T, management is saying, okay, well, you know, that's great, but my happiness says you need to be in this
In this bill, right.
$500,000 a month building I'm paying for.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So
Exactly.
now
Yeah.
you have conflict of happiness, I guess.
No, you're absolutely right, because happiness, it is we would describe it, if you go back to your basic training in ChangeWorks, as an abstract experience. So, or an abstraction. It is something that everyone experiences, but how do we know that one person's experience of happiness is even remotely similar to somebody else's experience of happiness? It's a unique kind of an experience, but we all have it. So you're absolutely right. How these people in power define happiness, or what your happiness should look like and should translate into behaviorally, can end up becoming very problematic.
Mhm.
Yep. All right. So yeah, let's go back to that diagram. Oh, hey, David, welcome.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be back.
Yeah, so glad, so glad. So Shag sent over this wonderful infographic from Happify.com. Can I still chat that over so you get it? I never know if, when people arrive after you've chatted something, does it appear in their chat, all the ones that they might not have seen, or do they only get chats from that from arrival forward?
Yeah, it's been my
So,
experience of rival forward.
yeah, that's what I'm. So anyway, I chatted it over, David, so you can get to this infographic. Very interesting. We're talking our way through it, and most of it feels very like on point, and some of we're raising our own little questions around, but it's certainly provoking a lot of good discussion. So get even more happiness out of a good experience by savoring it. Okay, so use all of your senses, pay attention to sight, sound, smells, etc. That's a good thing to do from a neurolinguistic programming side of things. Share it with somebody else. You know, I have to put this out there for you guys to discuss and debate, but I am an INTP, if you believe in that kind of stuff. I test out as a very strong poster child for INTP. And not only am I introverted by Myers-Briggs definition of it, which is how do you get your batteries recharged? But I know that I'm very much a reclusive person. I find no issues whatsoever about being alone. I don't have any difficulty going out to dinner by myself. I have no trouble going to see a movie by myself. I have no trouble going traveling somewhere and doing things by myself. And when I see things like, well, you share it with other people and nurture the relationships, for me, that feels like a burden, feels like a workload. Anybody else resonate with that, or am I just a bad, I'm missing something
You're an
significant?
INTP.
That's my point. I'm an INTP. This doesn't gel for me. So now, if I find another INTP who's aligned with whatever it is, I'm okay with us experiencing something at the same time, but I don't think we're doing it together. You know, if you can make that distinction. So Brian, how about you? I know.
I'm INFP.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I scored 0 for F. So there you go.
And I concur with what you just described. I appreciate relationships, but I appreciate them in my own time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Right. And if anything, I think as an IN whatever, we do like having relationships. We do like having, friends and associates and colleagues and all that sort of stuff, but we tend to be very selective.
Mhm.
Because there are certain people that are going to resonate with us and in that fact energize us, and others that are draining. And so, for example, I love doing the Circle of Brilliance. There's no reason for me to be doing this series of calls. I mean, it's not part of a revenue generating activity. That's not why we do this. We started this because it was COVID, and I thought, we've got all these people that are in the human development industry whose ability to deliver their services has been greatly compromised. At least, back then we thought it was going to be a few months, and now it's been 2 years. So, I just wanted to do something to create a little bit of community and help us keep all of our skills sharp and all that sort of a thing. So I was never did this because I had other motivations. So obviously, if I'm continuing to do it now that things are at least getting somewhat back to business, under the new normal, why would I be doing it if it wasn't because I like the conversation?
Right. And see, this
So,
explains what was discussed earlier about these different dispositions and thresholds that people have. Because if you're internally driven as an introvert, your sensory capacity comes from that. And so you welcome that. However, like when I'm in a situation where I'm around a crowd, that's too much sensory capacity for me. It's very uncomfortable. I don't like it.
mhm.
And so those dispositions are real, and they have to honor them. There's a lot
Right.
of science even behind that.
Right. Yep. And by the way, going back to this idea that 50% of someone's happiness, David, this is in the infographic in the early section. It said that 50% of someone's happiness is genetically predetermined.
Oh, wow.
So it may very well be that genetic contribution is great, obviously. But if you're just someone who is inherently more of a loner, well, then you're inherently more of a loner. And we need to operate within that.
Hmm.
Now, my other question that I'd like to throw out about these 4 things. So again, share with someone else, pay attention to the little details of the experience, linger, dwell on the moment. These are all, I think, really interesting things to do, but do you notice that in every one of them, what you're being called to do is to dissociate yourself from the experience that you're having and examine it and participate with it in a separate, conscious way. So it's like one of the things, Linda's a very good photographer, and she loves photographing anything and everything. So after all these years of marriage, I often say to her, well, let the photo documentary begin. I don't take photographs of places I go or things that I do, because for me, I just want to be in the moment. I'm there, and this is fine enough. And Linda likes to capture it for future, reminders and all that sort of a thing. So to me, it's a little bit of the difference. Are you in your life, or are you experiencing life through the lens of a camera?
Hmm.
I
That's how I
always
feel
wonder.
about
It's like,
technology.
yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
you've got to believe this. For that photographer to get that photo, that photographer was in that spot. Did they at least take a moment to be in the spot? Or was it driven by this agenda for capturing the perfect photo of the spot? So I think these are wonderful little points to put forth as exercises, but I think I would also want to say to the person, make sure that you are also there, and letting it be whatever it is. And then if you want to notice some of the other sensory input that you're getting, notice some of the details that are in the experience. So don't feel like you have to hurry through it for whatever reason. And this whole share it with someone else, well, I guess that's more of the personality kind of thing. So what does it say here in the L? Savoring experiences makes us happier, more grateful, and more hopeful while reducing levels of stress, guilt, and depression. They strengthen the parts of the brain connected with happiness. Okay, I didn't know there was a structure in the brain that was about happiness. What is that? Just part of the limbic system, the amygdala? Where does happiness?
Is Brian on the call?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's there. It's like, Brian, yeah, point to this structure. That's my happy spot.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think what they might be indicating is the limbic system. They always talk about limbic system, but the limbic system is not just all about emotions. It does a lot of different things. So, you know, whenever cortisol is released, the pituitary and the hypothalamus sets out oxytocin and,
Yep.
you know, different kinds of things to try to regulate it. So, you know, the limbic system is a key functioning process in terms of helping us with emotional regulation, but it's not the only part. So I
But
don't
as
know
far,
if you can
but
say
as,
that.
but as far as you know, there is not a spot in the brain or a structure in the brain that is all about where our happiness resides.
No,
So,
no,
and it says
that would be
parts of the brain
studied
in all
from
fairness,
very,
but yeah.
yeah, there'll be study from various parts. And again, whenever you think about the brain, the body in general, you have to think integrated way. You have
Yeah.
to think systems within systems within systems and how it impact one another. So it's never a single actor. It's not a single actor when it comes to happiness because you have the image. This is why it is a true tension management perspective. You have an image you're working with, something triggered that image, something triggered a memory, something triggered a thought, something triggered the emotion. So you have all of these elements coming together that all come from or at least process in their own systems.
Interesting.
So it's not a single actor when we're talking about happiness. That's why it's so subjective. When we're
Right,
talking
right.
about, okay, my employer says this is going to make everyone, but this is happiness. That's from their perspective,
Right.
not my perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. You know, it makes me want to pull out, I don't know if you guys know this about me. I'm sure I shared it on earlier in the work that we did, but you guys know what phrenology is? Who among you knows phrenology?
No.
No? Okay. Phrenology is something that for the better part of a couple of 100 years was what psychology was all based on. It was all based on the series of bumps and valleys on your skull. And so they figured out that all these different locations, all over your skull, that directly underneath that in your brain, there was a spot where certain things were greatly controlled. And so if your skull bulged there, it was because you had more of whatever that attribute was. And if you had a little pit there, you would have less of whatever that attribute was. And these maps were highly, highly thought about, studied, and one interesting thing about, again, this is at the turn of the 19th century. What we might have done as a career is we might have been a traveling phrenologist. And we would go into a community and we would first do a little demonstration for anyone who'd like to come to a free sort of an event. And at that free event, the organizers would have chosen people to come up on stage and have the phrenologist read them by putting their hands on their head and feeling the bumps and valleys. And they said that, you know, you need to have people that were widely known by the people in the audience, but unknown, obviously, to the phrenologist. And the phrenologist would start to tell you what your head said about you, and tell you, first of all the great things about you, and that would always get the agreement of the person. And then they would say, and people also view you as this and this and this. And the person would say, that's not true. But the audience would be going like, yes, it is. It absolutely is. And so, and it was something that had quite a bit of validity, but it had to do a lot with spacing of the eyes, with bone kind of protrusions across the forehead or whatever. So there was a lot of it that's very, very structural. But the belief was that the shape of your skull is dictated by what's underneath it. And so, you know, there's a lot of good, you know, supportive science around all that. Well, I don't remember what year it was that researchers started to do direct electrical stimulation of different parts of the brain. I'm sure they started off with animals of some sort, but ultimately they were able to even map a human brain and try to figure out if we put a little bit of an electrical signal at this little spot, what happens? Does the person have different memories? Do they have different reactions? What's really going on? So, and you guys know all kinds of that stuff was done. And what they found out was that the phrenologist map was largely correct. And so for a very long time, phrenology was it. Well, I happen to have a phrenology head. So you guys have seen these before. It's a white head of a human, and there's little words printed all over the head in little regions that have been kind of mapped out. You guys know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
Yep,
Yeah.
that's a phrenology head. And I have all the original textbooks about phrenology because when I started my speaking career, what I wanted to do was be a phrenologist, a modern day phrenologist. And I wanted to show up at one of these events dressed in the attire of the late 1800s and speak in the language of the late 1800s and have companies bring people up and I would read their head. And that was what my big scheme was. And then suddenly, I had this change grid thing occur to me, and that ended up being the direction that I went. So
And T, all the time you were talking about phrenologists and how they do what they do, all I could picture was you reading a change grid.
well, see, isn't that it? Because I do think it's very similar. I'm just not reading bumps on people's heads. I'm reading something else. And thanks for that. So anywho, if you guys ever want to take a deeper look at phrenology, there is a great deal of it that overlays on the change grid very nicely. But all that just to say that I should pull out the phrenology map and see if happiness sits at a particular spot on the map. In fact, any of you who wants to do a quick little search on Google for phrenology, phrenology, map happiness, we might be able to find a good illustration for that. But Shags,
Midbrain, most
you do?
likely.
Where's that now? Midbrain?
Probably in the midbrain, which is part of the limbic system is midbrain.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of funny things you can do too. Like right now, if you guys will all take your fingertips and put them on the back of your head, right at the base of your skull. So not on your spine, but the skull itself, you'll feel these two protrusions like the edges of the brain. So that's your, and you can tell me, is yours flat? Does it stick out? Does it cave in? What's it feel like right there? And I have to show you the exact spot for you to get the real fun joke, but I have everyone in the audience would do this. And then I'd say to them, that's where your love of sex is revealed. And so everyone suddenly starts giggling and all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of things about your, like, for example, can you guys look at a piece of land and estimate how many acres it is? Or can you look at an object off in the distance and estimate how far away it is?
Yeah.
So I've never been able to do that, ever. So, and so I was looking where those spatial recognition sorts of abilities are. They tend to go around your eye orbit. And for me, I have a dent at every one of those locations. So yeah, they are. Anyway, so there's some validity to it, or it wouldn't have been around for as long as it was and viewed as being. In fact, back in those days, if you had certain structural features on your skull, anything in your head, so anything about your skull, mandible, anything, facial bones, all that kind of stuff, they really believed that they could easily identify who was criminal. And that lo and behold, there are other things that followed that supported that. So for example, one of the things they came up with as being a psychological problem where people have no concept of cause and effect. So they do things with no awareness or understanding at all that what they've just done could end up causing a bigger problem down the road. Later on, they figured out that the way that you could tell that someone was going to have this problem was based on the spacing between their eyes. So if you look at your eyes, the outermost point of your eye itself, so where your lids would close, the outermost point, and the distance between that outermost point and the innermost point of that eye, true for both sides, should be the exact same distance between your eyes themselves. The exact same distance. If that distance is too wide or too close, that's how fetal alcohol syndrome presents itself. So usually people weren't able to diagnose fetal alcohol syndrome until behavior started, and the hallmark behavior is this lack of understanding of cause and effect. But they were able to go, no, let's see what we can figure out. And lo and behold, it was all about eye spacing. So you might want to look that one up too and say, what is the eye spacing that's considered normal?
You know, I'm looking on the phrenology model right now, T, and I can't find happiness.
Yeah, I see. I don't remember it offhand where it would be on that, but I got to believe if there's a spot, the phrenology map would include it.
Well, they're broken up into, because it's based on, I see what they're talking about now. So it's based on anatomy. So it's broken up into various regions.
Yeah, well, on the one side of the head, it'll show the regions. On the other side of the head, it'll actually show much finer tuned things.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So like the morale is on top of the head. You know, the domestic is at the back of the head, like the base of the brain. And see, that makes sense to me because remember, the brain is broken up into three, really how it evolved over time into three divisions, basically. So you have the base of the brain, which they call the reptilian brain, and that's all about survival.
Yep.
And the midbrain is the mammalian brain, which is where the emotions, and it looks just like the baby brain of a mammal.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And then the cortex, that frontal part, which they have as reflectives and perceptives, that's the part of the brain, you know, is known as the executive control. That's supposed to separate humans from all other species.
Yeah. Interesting. You know, I think too, we might need to pull out the definitions of each of these because they certainly use things that would have made sense at the time, like veneration. When was the last time you guys used that word? You know,
Today.
Yeah, there you go. Emotiveness is the love of love. So that's where that's that little section. Then this little dark section they couldn't talk about because it was considered to be inappropriate. But that's where the love of sex itself sits on your head. So that's hysterical. Absolutely hysterical.
Peak right there. So I guess that's a
It's good for you. Yeah, but let's see if I can open this. No. Oh, I don't need ads. Oh, hello, welcome. So glad you could join us. But like right here around your eye, this is your ability to estimate size, form, weight, your color thing, the order of things, calculations. These are all around your eye orbit.
And see, that makes sense because that's all you're dealing with spatial perception, right? And the eyes is the only sense organ that has direct connectivity to the brain stem. That's why vision and image and things that we process that way, the things we see on TV, those images, they like process immediately.
Yeah, yep, there you go. Yeah, it's just if you start looking around, hope, but yeah, I don't see, unless I don't know one of these words and how it ties. I mean, benevolence could tie to happiness, self-esteem could tie to happiness, but I don't remember in all my studies of phrenology ever having happiness. Friendship or adhesiveness. When was the last time you described someone as being adhesive? Approbativeness. But like conjugality, vitality, parental love, you know, it's a very interesting thing to study. Yeah, I didn't remember where happiness might sit on it. Okay, let's get back. We still have a few parts of this infographic to take a look at. So yeah, so Shags, thanks for this. I mean, I had other things I was going to talk about, but this seems to be going pretty well. Look how long this infographic is.
Wow.
Oh, The happiest countries are, yeah, yet again, as of 2022, Finland is yet again the #1 happiest place on earth.
Probably 'cause
They
of the
actually have
population anyway.
I guess you can call it a accelerator where you can spend 90 days working in Finland to experience their happiness.
Yeah, yeah, it's a
Called the
really big deal.
Helsinki something or something another. It's an interesting
Yeah,
thing.
that would be great. When I was doing my work with IBM, Scandinavia was one of the areas that I was focusing on. And so the Finns are very interesting people. In their school system, homework is completely forbidden. No kid ever has homework, yet they outperform, the Finnish students will outperform many other countries or most other countries on what they end up learning or whatever. So they go, oh no, school's over, now go do other things that involve life. Yep.
I don't want to be geographically illiterate, but isn't Finland border Russia?
It does, absolutely.
Well, I got to tell you, I think that list is going to change.
I think that list is going to change.
And I think I'm the least happy. Ukraine is going to be up near the top.
Well, I think too, and I'd like to see what the criteria were that they were using for this, because
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, T.
because the other place that's considered super happy is Bhutan. So, and I don't know why that is, but they don't talk about we have our GDP, so yeah, what's it called? The gross
Domestic product.
domestic product. Thank you very much. They have a GHP, so the gross happiness product. That's what they care about, is that their people are happy.
Finland's happy because they kept the Russians at bay.
Yeah, well, it's just true, that whole area. So that's, terrible stuff happening
I
out
was
there.
an exchange student for a summer program. 3 weeks, a Finnish guy lived with me, and then I went back and lived with his family, and they were in Savonlinna, which is where the fortress was that was used. Amazing. Beautiful country.
Really is amazing. Least happy countries: Afghanistan, South Sudan, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Central African Republic. I mean, I wonder how many then of their parameters around the definition of happiness are based on economics or economic availability, or I mean, I get there's a lot of things going on in this pile, and that's
And
2019.
We ranked number 18, huh?
Yeah, but I think we moved up to 16. But we're definitely there. Oh, these are the things correlated with higher national happiness. Okay. GDP per capita, fine. Freedom to make life choices, generosity, longevity. But the most important factor researchers found is social support, having someone to count on in times of trouble.
Yeah, see that would,
Yeah, there exactly.
yeah, that's challenging for those countries that are least happy there. That's a challenge for them.
Yeah, well, it has to be. That's very interesting.
And even the longevity one, because in lots of countries in Africa, in fact, in South Africa, the lifestyle conditions such as diabetes is the second leading cause of death for people under 60.
Right. Yep. This is interesting too, unless things have changed. Do you guys know what the leading cause of death in the world actually is? I mean, we would think it's cardiovascular disease based on our society, but do you know what the actual leading cause of death in the world is?
Still malaria?
It's diarrhea. Diarrhea. So from, whatever water, I'm sure there's water related issues, there's disease related issues, all kinds of things like that. But yeah, diarrhea.
Yeah, dehydration.
Well, you get dehydrated, you're a goner.
Yep.
So, all right, one more thing. I know I'm having a great time with this infographic, and because it's so long, maybe we can save our next little piece of it for next Tuesday's call. But I just want to slide something else in here for you guys to take a look at and ponder a bit. And I'll send you the link to this as well. But I've spoken about Sunya Saburo Makaguchi, and Yeah, thank you so much. And his role, and well, there's a website, so I'm going to send you the link directly to this page. But if you just kind of go exploring around the website, you'll learn a lot more about him. But there's this whole group. I mean, he died in 1944, so he had nothing to do with his presence on the internet. But one of the things that he did talk about was that the object of life was to create individual happiness, that what really is driving people, whoever they are, whatever they're doing, is to get closer and closer to their idea of what happiness is. And no two people might agree on the whole thing, but bottom line, he says that's what it really is. And he said that the way you end up happy is by that happiness is the goal. The process of achieving happiness has to do with value creation. And so he's a very big deal about, he wrote a book about value creating pedagogy. And I thought that was interesting. He talks about the philosophy of value is the book that I talk the most about. And in that he talks about how the more valuable you become to others, and the more you value what other people bring to you, the stronger relationships are going to be. And so his whole goal was to have individual students. He was an educator at his core, but he would say that he wanted to teach kids to create as much value, to recognize that life is really about exchanging value. So you've got stuff that other people value, they've got stuff that you value, you work together to share one another's value. And I'm talking about economic value in addition to moral value, survival value, etc. So it was really great.
I studied axiology, and that's the formal name for value science with Dr. Robert Hartman, who created mathematical science. In fact, he was nominated for a Nobel Prize before he passed away in that work. And he too would say that life is about adding value. And that's why human life, you can't place a value on it.
Right, exactly. Chris just chatted a quote over there. This is something that I actually, if I'm going to be talking about the philosophy of MasterStream or the philosophy behind tension management and all that sort of thing, that's an exact quote that I use, because we talk about people pay attention to where they find their tension. And Makaguchi said the degree to which an individual values a thing will determine the level of attention that thing will command. And he goes on to say that things that in no way at all represent value to you, or by the way, the flip side of this is something that's taking value away from you. So you're valuing it, it's going to get your attention, or if something that you value is being put into jeopardy, that'll get your attention too. But he says things that you don't value, you'll be totally oblivious to them. Totally oblivious. And I think this parallels very much with the work that I know Tim does when he's talking about diversity and inclusion. How often, Tim, do people learn that there are things to think about they never even thought about, because up until that moment of awareness, they didn't attach any value to it?
Oh, absolutely. Particularly that comes up when we engage in conversation around unconscious bias.
Yeah, bias are very much, determined by what you value. And so I think this is, I mean, of all the brilliant people that I've read about or examined their work as we've done this whole merging of brilliance kind of thing, I got to tell you, Makaguchi is top on the list. Just top on the list. But boy, was he a troublemaker. So he was.
Hey, I tried to find that book. I really couldn't find it.
Yeah,
the philosophy of value.
Yeah. I have one copy of it. Let's see, the philosophy. SOPHY of value, Makaguchi, MAKAGUCHI. Once in a while, you'll see one available on Amazon. The philosophy of history. Well, here's one for $374. But yeah.
That's expensive knowledge.
I'm just saying that's a bit pricey. So, but this is the philosophy of value. Obviously, they're saying it's translated. Well, thank you for that. It's coming from Germany, but there it is. So they do exist, but you've really got to be looking out. Please tell me they didn't translate it into German, because that's not going to help me. Oh, I'll bet you anything it's in German. Ugh, yeah, oh well. For those of you who speak German, Regina might like it. She speaks German.
Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch.
Oh, okay, so you could order it too. How perfect is that? Wait, here we go.
What I said was I speak very little German.
Oh, well.
I learned a little bit when I was in the military.
Oh, well.
Enough to get my face slapped.
Well, ich bin ein Berliner. No, isn't that a jelly donut? So here it is on Amazon. Amazon has a copy of it right now. I will tell you the cover looks a little bit better than that. So you can't even see the words on that one anymore. $549.
Wow.
That's got to be in mint condition.
Wow.
Talk about value.
Yeah, it's a small book. It's no more than 6 inches tall and maybe 4.5 inches wide. So it's more of a pocketbook kind of a dimension. So wow, who knew? Where's my copy?
Add to cart.
I'm saying, yeah, but 3 used from $400.
Get both of them, yeah, or all of them. I got to run.
Okay, all right, yeah, it's time. Okay, so everybody, thanks so much for joining in, and we will pick up where we left off come next week. So thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.
You
Thanks,
too.
Steve.
Bye for now.